One more person. Good afternoon. I'm Jane Vossler, and I'd like to welcome you to this program on behalf of the Community Senior Center and the Richmond Historical Society. We are co-sponsoring it. And the program is really made possible by a grant from the Vermont Humanities Council. So we really want to thank them. It's a great pleasure to welcome Michael Tougias back. He was a speaker for us about a year ago on the Cuban Missile Crisis. He's a New York Times bestselling author. He's written or co-written about 30 books and is a New York Times bestselling author. He lectures across the country and does inspirational programs for businesses, and I think he does a lot of other things too. And he's speaking to us today from sunny Florida, where it's about 70 degrees. So welcome, Michael. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Jane. Hi, everyone. Actually, these slides are going to make everybody feel nice and warm because I think all of them were taken at the height of summer when I did these trips. So a lot of people ask me, did you do your trip down the 410 miles of the Connecticut River all at once? And I did not. I spread it out over a series of weekends, doing small patches each weekend because I was taking notes and photographs and interviewing people along the way. I do know some people that have, canoed or kayaked almost the whole length, and they said it took them about 10 days of pretty heavy paddling and camping along the shore. I think that would be tough though, because there's stretches that are pretty monotonous. So I preferred the way I did it, to come back and forth. So what we do is we start at the very headwaters of the river, which is right on the Canadian border. I'll bet a couple of you have even been there. So in this slide, you see above Holbrook, New Hampshire, there's a big swath of land, and that's called Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, right up against the border. And the river starts in this little beaver pond, maybe 200 yards on the U.S. side of the border. And the only way to reach the headwaters here, the very start, is to park at the customs station and then hike up the international boundary. And then you'll see this beaver pond. So putting in a canoe here would be very difficult because you'd have to carry it up that big hill. And then the water flowing out of here is pretty scratchy, pretty shallow. So you'd be doing more walking your canoe than paddling. So, but some people have done it. I remember I was talking to the woman at the customs station, and she said, "Oh yeah, 2 years ago I saw two men carry their canoe for an hour up that big hill, put it in, and they started going down." But you could see how difficult it would be. They'd be dragging the canoe, so you'd have to have a good pair of sturdy boots to get down. But beautiful country, because it's undeveloped. Most of it's owned by the paper companies. They leave what I call a beauty strip along the river where they don't log the trees right next to the river. And so it's quite remote up there. Some great trout fishing up there. You have all three species of trout, and you have landlocked salmon in the Connecticut lakes. Here's a brown trout. They kind of take on the colors of fall when they're spawning, which is kind of a vibrant orange on some of the dots and on the flanks of the belly. Same with the brook trout, the browns and the brook trout. They both spawn in the fall. Rainbows are a spring spawner. And moose, a lot of times I'm from Massachusetts, although I'm vacationing in Florida, but a lot of times people in Massachusetts say, where can I go to see a moose? And one, I explain their population is way down because of the winter deer ticks. But I say your best chance, in my opinion, is along Route 3 up on the headwaters of the Connecticut River in Pittsburgh. And oftentimes the moose are coming next to that roadway to get the salt that was put there to melt the ice. And so this is where I saw this moose, and people wondered, how'd you get this close up? And I have to be honest, I took it from the car window. So the moose didn't run away. As soon as I opened the car door, it started to amble off. But I just came out with a new book, a memoir about growing up in Western Massachusetts and Vermont. And I discussed another time I tried to get a photo like this and the moose charged. And I had a very close call. So I learned my lesson. Not all my moose pictures come out as planned. I call this one the unicorn moose. It looks like that silver birch was coming off the top of his head like an antler. And so as you make your way down, the beginning of the river, which is really a stream, you're going to hit the 4 Connecticut lakes. And this is First Connecticut Lake, one of the bigger ones further to the south. And there's various lodges there. I took this picture at a lodge called the Glen, and they've got some little power boats there. You could go trolling for the salmon. And then I took this picture of Back Lake, which is opposite First Connecticut Lake. A friend of mine just bought a cottage up there, and boy, he fell in love with it. It's a wonderful spot. And you have access to the river just 10 minutes away for some great fishing and canoeing and kayaking. A lot of loons, and if you look carefully, there's looks like one chick, maybe 2. I think it was 2, as I remember the photo, on the back of the mother there. And if you look carefully at the father loon in the back, he's got a little minnow in his beak. So the chicks ride on the back of the mother, and if she dives down for a fish, they just bob on the surface, and when she comes back up, they crawl right on her back again and get a ride. So amazing birds, and quite big too. If you're up close to one, you realize the size of them. And if you've ever seen one in flight, once they get off the water, they need a long runway, but once they do get off the water, boy, are they fast. They're like a rocket. If you decide to make a trip up that way this summer, bring your passport so you can go over the border of Canada, and you park down by that white house, and this is called Magnetic Hill. And you put your car in neutral, turn the engine off, and slowly your car rolls right up the hill. So it's a optical illusion, but it's well worth. It's only about a mile over the border from the U.S. Again, called Magnetic Hill. So there's a mountain range that separates the watershed of the Androscoggin, which is more towards the Maine side of New Hampshire, and the headwaters of the Connecticut towards the Vermont side. And this is the Dixville Notch Road, and that's Table Rock in the middle, the tallest of these peaks. And you could either hike up the hard way, up the front here, or the back way, a little easier but longer. I've done it both. But when you get to the top, it is an incredible view looking down at the balsams, that grand resort that's there that I think they've gone mostly to condominiums now. When I stayed there years ago, it was still as a resort, and it felt like you were in Switzerland. But I think they had trouble because they were so far north. When the gas prices went up a couple different times over the last 20 years, people didn't want to go that far. And so I know they've converted a lot of their space to private ownership as well. So we're back on the river, and people say, okay, if it's too shallow way up in Pittsburgh, where do you recommend putting a canoe or a kayak in? And I say down towards the Colebrook line, Beecher Falls of Vermont. I have kayaked through Beecher Falls, and it can be a little rough in there, because it's all rapids and a few little drops. But this is right below it, right below Beecher Falls. And here the rapids are a little more gentle, and it's It's absolutely beautiful. I'm looking at this picture, just dying to be back there right now. Look at that water coming through, and it's nice cold water too, because it's coming off the bottom of those 4 lakes, which are reservoirs, and it's controlled by dams. So there's a consistent flow of water. It never gets too low because they do have the means to control the river. So when I started my explorations, it was years ago, and I was using this Old Town pack canoe, and my friend who took this picture said, "Boy, it looks so small, like you're in a bathtub." But the key is you want a vessel that's lightweight enough that you can pick it up on your own and put it up and down the car. And I made the mistake on my first trip down the river when I got out. I said, how am I going to get back to the car? So I had to hitchhike all the way back and get the car, then get the canoe. So I quickly realized the best way to see the river was to use a bicycle in conjunction with the canoe. In other words, pick your takeout spot in advance and chain your bicycle to a tree there, then drive back up and launch your canoe. And when you make it, say, 10 or 15 miles to the bike, you bike back to get your car. So in the course of those back and forths, I was seeing the river 4 different times, from the car, from the canoe, and from the bike, and then the car once again. And then I saw these women go by in kayaks, and they were going faster than me, and I said, I got to get a kayak. And I'm glad I did, because you're lower to the water, so you've got the double-bladed paddle. You can paddle faster. But they also have the backrest, so it's a little more comfortable. So for speed and comfort, I would pick a kayak over a canoe. But a canoe has its advantages as well. So this is the first treacherous spot if you were to put in below Beecher Falls. This is called the Lyman Dam, and of course it's been breached and knocked over, but you've still got quite a drop there, and the water curls back on itself, creating a whirlpool. And what makes this kind of dangerous is when you're coming down the river, you can't really see this. Here's a shot I took as I'm approaching it. You just see this little bit of white water up ahead, and you think, oh, that's nothing, I'll run that. But it's actually a 2-foot drop. So I try to do this section of the river every single year. This last year was the first one, I missed it. But usually I portage around this. In one year, I saw a young man coming down a canoe, and he was going to run the dam, and I watched, and he did it perfectly. He didn't tip over or anything, but then after he went through the white water, he lifted his paddle in celebration and promptly capsized. So I helped him gather his gear that was at the bottom of this big pool. And down there, I saw 5 other old fishing rods. So other people have made the same mistake. So we're probably, from the source, I'd say we're maybe about 35 miles down the river already. You will see evidence of the logging days where they used to send the logs from northern New England down to southern New England. Towns like Holyoke had big paper mills. But this is what they call the logging crib, where they would string cable from one of these anchor points to another one, and that would corral all the logs behind it. And then they'd release them all at once because they didn't want them going down the river piecemeal. So I've seen quite a few of these on the river. It's amazing that the timbers have held up over the years. And then they filled it in with rubble. And if you're going to take, say, a drive up the river, I find the Vermont side is way more peaceful. This is Guildhall, I believe. And, even during the fall, not too many tourists come this far north. And then the Placey Farm, it's at a bend in the river. It's a beautiful farm, and they have their cows there. And you have the Green Mountains on one side of the river and the White Mountains on the other. And like I said, not too much traffic this far north. So a lot of people like to just bike the river as well. And again, when I was doing it, I was doing both, canoeing down and then biking back to the car. So I'd get a different perspective both ways. Although I did see a gentleman in a canoe had a better idea than me. He brought his bicycle in the canoe so he could take out whenever he got tired or whenever he wanted to. He didn't have to go all the way down to where he chained his bike to a tree. So I thought that was a great idea, and I'd like to try that sometime. Not in the rapids. I don't want to lose a canoe and a bike, but if it's placid like it is in this picture by the Placey farm. Now you can tell I'm not paddling with my feet up. So what I did was when I found the big dams on the river, there's 19 dams on the river, they would create these giant impoundments, reservoirs, impoundments, and there was no current. And oftentimes the wind was blowing up from the south-southwest, catching the bow of my canoe and making it really difficult. So whenever I knew I was going to be a weekend in one of these big lakes, that's really part of the river just backed up, I would bring a little electric motor, and that would help me get down and help with the fishing. And you have one of the round barns from the Shakers. And I was reading how the concept of the round barn, one positive aspect was that the farmer could put the feed right in the middle and the cows could access it from all sides. But then I met a woman up there and she said, no, the real reason was that these Shakers, they believed that if you made it round, there would be no corners for the devil to hide in. And I thought, whether that's true or not, that's a lot better than the idea of putting the feed in the middle. So we've now come down the river quite a few miles, and we're down to Orford, New Hampshire. There's a beautiful street there, and they call the homes set back like this one Bullfinch Road. All the homes are on these rolling green lawns set way back. And this was the home of Samuel Morey. And there's a chapter in River Days where I discuss who invented the steamboat. Was it Morey or Fulton? And my research indicated Morey was the first one, but Fulton made it commercially viable and got all the credit. So legend has it that Morey sank his boat in Lake Morey in Fairleigh, Vermont. And separating Lake Morey, that's the Connecticut River you see in the distance, are the Palisades. And these have nesting peregrine falcons in them. So the hiking season to go up to the Palisades is closed during the nesting time of the year, which I think was July. I went up there in the fall, and it is a nice hike to look down on the river. I took this photo from there, and you might be wondering, why is the river a brown color? Well, on that trip, it had poured rain, and I was originally going to camp on an island with my canoe, and I'm glad I didn't. Instead, I camped behind that church. And then that night it poured. And so the next day I drove up and took a look at the island. The island was totally submerged by the floodwaters. So I would have had a heck of a time in the middle of the night trying to pull up my tent, get it into the canoe, and get to shore. So it was just luck that during that deluge I was down behind the church. But I did get a nice hike in the next day, and there was a beautiful rainbow that came out. So I was very glad that I didn't try to do the trip all at once, because it would be more of a marathon rather than relaxing and taking pictures and kind of poking around a little bit. I did notice more boat traffic when I reached Dartmouth College over in Hanover. This is where their outing club launches their boats. And you've got one of the dams there, the Wilder Dam. You're looking on the backside of the dam, so the water's coming over the dam, and you can see the fish ladder there. And say you decide to go up here in the spring, there are visiting hours to get inside the dam and look through the the plate glass and see what's coming up. And we saw this big lamprey eel coming up the river to spawn. And it's actually suctioning onto the glass here with that circular mouth. It's got rows and rows of tiny spiraling teeth, and they'll latch right onto a big fish, and they're a parasite and hang on. And earlier, remember I showed you the unicorn moose with the birch tree coming out of the head? I call this picture the unicorn human with the lamprey. It's almost like a snake charmer, the lamprey coming up from the head. You know, it was interesting. I'd see a few beaver, not too many, but I didn't see the beaver lodges. And a lot of times the beaver would skip making the lodge and instead just burrow right into the banks of the river because there were steep banks in places. So the locals said, oh, we call those bank beavers, but it's the exact same beaver, but they've just decided to make their lodge that way. And these are not a native animal. This is the mute swan. They're not native and they're very aggressive. If you say paddle by one of these in the spring and it's got its babies around, it will attack your canoe. So I know in the past, Vermont had a program to reduce their population. I wish Massachusetts would do the same because they're taking over every body of water because they're bigger than the native birds. But here's a nice native bird that I love, the osprey. I typically think of them as an ocean bird because they like to make their nests on bays and on estuaries, but they were nesting way up on the Connecticut River as well. And from a distance, the way to tell them apart from a bald eagle is that dark streak on the side of the head. They're also a lot smaller than a bald eagle, but from a distance, it's hard to tell the size. And so they swoop down and feed on fish, called the fish hawk. And this was just pure luck getting this photo of these two barred owls, because I was paddling under these trees, heard something above, and was able to get the camera up quickly. Other owls will flee, but I've learned barred owls are kind of used to humans, or they tolerate us for whatever reason. And I've also learned they make all sorts of strange noises. They can communicate, not just in the old, here's my normal barred owl call. But they have other calls too. They're deep, guttural. And I wrote a book called There's a Porcupine in My Outhouse. And it's about my cabin in Woodbury, Vermont. And although I still have the cabin, I bought it when I was just age 23 years old and tried to live up there like a mountain man and didn't know what I was doing. But one of the incidents I had was having two barred owls come right next to me while I was sitting out on my little deck one night. And it was just fascinating to observe all the different noises they made. And a Luna moth, usually you see these in June. This one is missing its long tail because it flew right through my campfire. But the next morning it was gone, so I assume it could still fly. And one of the reasons that the great blue herons are coming back in great numbers is because the beavers are making so many beaver ponds out of streams that it's creating the ideal nesting habitat for the great blue herons. Because they like to nest up in these dead trees coming up from the water. So they call this a rookery, but to me it looks prehistoric. And they, these big birds probably are the closest thing to dinosaurs in many respects. So we've just passed White River Junction. The White River is a gorgeous river to paddle. I do that one every summer as well. And these series of rocks here below that junction is kind of a warning. They call these the chicken and the hen rocks, but it's a warning that up ahead is the Heartland Rapids on the Heartland, Vermont. And in the summer, it's very shallow. You have to drag your canoe over these ledges. But you can imagine in the spring where the water is boiling over these pointed rocks sticking up, how tricky this spot would be. And there's been drownings here too, where fishermen go out on these rocks, but then because of the dam releases further upstream, the water starts rising. They don't realize it, and water can get into your waders, and you get in deep trouble. But we've made it down to Heartland, Vermont. We're not too far from Mount Ascutney now. There it is in the background at the Windsor Cornish Bridge. That's said to be the longest covered bridge east of the Mississippi. I know they had a fire a few years back, but as I understand it, everything's fine with it now. It's just a beautiful specimen. And a great place to fish behind, because the fish like to be out of the current and then dart out to get whatever's floating by and then go back. And, it's all about conserving calories for wildlife. It's funny, the wildlife does the opposite of humans. We're trying to burn calories so we can continue to eat more. Wildlife is trying to do the opposite. The St. Gaudens National Historic Site is over there in Charlestown, New Hampshire. Well worth a visit in the spring. You've got all sorts of flowering bushes and plants and trails. There's a beautiful one through the white birches. And then you could make a day trip out of it because nearby is the Colonial Fort, simply called the Fort at number 4, lot number 4. And this is a recreation of the fort in its original spot. And it's really beautiful. Call ahead, though, because the hours of operation keep changing. But there was quite a attack there. This was, by the way, the northernmost settlement during the French and Indian Wars. I do a presentation on all the Indian Wars in New England. And boy, this fort took the brunt of all the raids coming down by the French with their native allies against the English colonists. And in 1754, Susanna Johnson was taken captive here, and she was pregnant at the time, gave birth to the baby on day 2. And if you go down to Cavendish on the Reading line, you'll see a marker there. And she wrote after her release that the natives wanted to keep her and the baby alive, so they let her ride the horse. But by day 5, everybody was so hungry they killed the horse and ate the horse. So now she's got to hike up and over the Green Mountains, getting all the way to Lake Champlain and then to Crown Point and then up into Montreal. So at Bellows Falls, you've got the falls. There are some native carvings down there, but I think you need a pair of binoculars to look down and to see them clearly. So we've hit what I call roughly the halfway point where you're leaving Vermont and New Hampshire and entering Massachusetts. And I would see, more erosion along the banks. And I thought, maybe it's, because we're seeing more speedboats. But it's probably because, again, the river is controlled by dams, so you have that water fluctuation. And this was the one hazard for me being in a canoe. I remember some young kid wanted to swamp me on purpose, and he came charging towards me in a speedboat, and then at the last second turned to send this big wake to tip me over. But fortunately, I'd taken both the canoe and the kayak on the ocean and learned if a wave's coming at you, get your bow into it and kind of ride it that way rather than taking it on the side. So I don't know why he did it, but luckily I didn't capsize. I've capsized other times, but not this time. I love this view. You're looking back towards Vermont on the left, looking north, and New Hampshire on the right. And I took this shot from what's called the French King Bridge that takes Route 2 above the Connecticut River. And then looking down the other way, you see one of the main tributaries dumping into the Connecticut. This is the Millers River. And if you stand, you can walk out on the bridge, by the way. There is a walkway. And if you look right down, you can actually see where the different color water from the Millers River and the Connecticut River meet. You see that bubble line there. So the Miller's River is the tannin tea-colored water on the left, and the Connecticut's a little bluer on the right, and this is where they meet. And this is also the deepest part in the river. Some reports say it's up to 100 feet deep here, just below that French King Bridge. This was also the site at Turner's Falls of a giant Native American settlement, because they would catch the shad and the salmon that would hit the falls there, and it would be an easy place for them to get them in the spring. I wrote 2 books, one of which I co-authored on King Philip's Indian War, and Turner's Falls was the scene of a pivotal battle. So Captain Turner came up from the Springfield area, and he got volunteers from Northampton and Hadley, and he was going to make an attack on this hostile native village. And this is King Philip's War, by the way, was 1675 to 1676. And on a per capita basis, it was the bloodiest war ever fought by Americans. So a lot of people don't know about it, but the casualty rate was the highest. And so with Eric Schultz, I did this complete history of the war. It's a big 400-page book, because so much of the action takes place along the Connecticut River. But Turner's Falls, Turner goes up there and he surprises the natives by swooping around to the north and then trapping them up against the bend in the river. And he wipes out this safe haven of a village, but he doesn't make it back to safety alive. Some of the natives find his retreat route and catch up with him, and he's killed in Greenfield. But many historians, myself included, think that this attack on this safe haven for the natives, where they would kind of rest and resupply, was the beginning of the end of them trying to win this war. And this is what it looked like after the English moved in and settled it. You had 2 islands in the middle there. The natives used to camp on those islands and catch the shad and the salmon. And then today it's so ugly because it's this big hydroelectric plant. But no fear, because just a little bit further down through Montague and Sunderland, the river's beautiful again. I took this shot from the summit of Mount Holyoke. So if you're ever on a drive and you're going down Route 91 into Mass, get off in South Deerfield and you can drive right to the summit. I said Holyoke, I misspoke. This is Sugarloaf. Holyoke is in the distance. You can drive up to Sugarloaf and get these great views. And down below was the largest sycamore tree east of the Mississippi, just an incredible specimen. So this is on the Sunderland side of the river. I remember the lady came out when I was taking this picture. The tree was on her property. And I said, "Oh, you're so lucky to have this tree." And she goes, "Not in the fall," meaning all the leaves she had to rake. But it looks like he could walk on water, but there's still some rapids on the river, surprisingly, even in Massachusetts or in Sunderland. This was a beautiful stretch to paddle through. Keep meaning to go back there, but somehow time has a way of slipping by and you don't do all the places on your list. That's when my son was little. I'm not sure if it's hard to tell it. I think that could be a walleye, it could be a smallmouth bass, one of the two. We caught both. Now he towers over me. He's 6 feet, but we had some fun trips down the river and we'd set up our campsite on a sandy bank. And the river is clean enough to swim in. That's not me, by the way, but they had a fun rope swing. And the one time you don't want to swim in the river is after a heavy rain, because many of the sewers, the sewage pipes that takes the sewage to the sewage treatment plant also takes runoff from rain. And if you get a really, really heavy rain, the sewage treatment plant can't keep up with it all. So the sewage gets diverted from the sewage treatment plant and goes right into the river. And I'll talk about this a little bit more. That's one of the main issues we still have to solve to get it back to what they call Class A, which is the highest quality. This is a satellite view looking down on Northampton. That's the old oxbow there. The river no longer runs through it. So way back, who knows when, many thousands of years ago, it made a more direct path through Mount Holyoke and Mount Tom there, that little narrow channel. The slide's out of focus on purpose because it's the Connecticut River Loch Ness Monster coming out to attack my canoe. And I didn't always camp. I stayed at inns as well. This one was in Hadley. It was an old stagecoach stop. Actually, the first location was right next to the river, but because of various flooding before all the dams, they moved it back here, and then the owners turned it into a great little B&B. And I always wondered, why are they missing slats? And then I realized, these are the tobacco barns. So they're curing and drying the tobacco here, hanging it up high. That was grueling work. I think I did one day at a tobacco farm when I was a kid. There's not too many left. Seems to be taken over by organic farming and then growing marijuana in the states that allow it. And here's a real dinosaur track right next to the river. So this is about 17 inches long from the tip of the toe to the base. And this is in Holyoke, where, it must have been mud way back when the dinosaurs were here, and now it's in the rock. Now we're up at the top of Mount Holyoke, and many of the tallest mountains in New England had hotels on the summits. And the thinking was rich people wanted to get away from the cities in the summer because of the air pollution. The air quality was so bad. So they'd want to be up high, and they'd stay at these summit houses. And this is a real beauty. It no longer operates as a hotel, but it's a museum. And like these women are having a picnic and they're looking north towards Amherst. So you get some great views on the river. These pictures I did not take. All the other ones I took, but not this one. I never did see a salmon coming up the river. The experiment failed, but the salmon were never established in any big numbers. Could be a whole bunch of reasons for that. It could be the striped bass eating the salmon at the mouth of the river, global warming because the river's warmer than it used to be. I think it has to do with the dams that, the salmon can get over the dams, but I think the fingerlings on their way back to the ocean get sucked into the turbines. But, it did, by trying to reintroduce the salmon and at the same time clean up the river, it's in so much better shape today than it used to be. It used to be different colors from all the dyes from the textile mills. And a lot of the credit goes to that Clean Water Act of 1972. So, we say the federal government can't do anything right, but they got this right. And the river is just so much healthier today. And the fish stock is so much stronger. Before those dams were built, though, the flooding was brutal. For example, I think of modern times, the way Irene hit Vermont so hard. The Connecticut River fared pretty well because they could control the releases from all the dams. But before they were built, here's a section of Northampton underwater, another area nearby. If you were a farmer, you took a big hit. This, by the way, was the flood of 1936. There was another biggie with a hurricane in 38, trying to save some of the man-made structures along the river with the sandbagging. And to give you an idea how high the water is, here's a railroad trestle. Usually these are 30, 40 feet above the river, and here the water's right up to the train tracks. So you're not gonna stop Mother Nature. Look at those waves coming down the river. And people gathered at the North End Bridge in Springfield to to assess the damage. That's West Springfield on the other side, all flooded out. The Big E was flooded out. But here's a modern day view looking at the North End Bridge, and got those beautiful, I call them the salt and pepper shaker turrets. And Springfield's trying to reconnect itself as best it can with the river. So they've got the Basketball Hall of Fame down by the river, and some trails are going in. Hartford's done a really good job connecting the city back to the river. It used to be kind of like no one wanted to be near the river because it smelled. Now you want that beauty as part of the city. So that issue with the sewage, they call it combined sewer overflow. And again, the sewers, they have to be replaced because they can't handle all that heavy rain along with the sewage. And they did put up these signs of where you're getting a direct discharge. So at least people know to avoid that area after a rainfall. You're looking from the South End Bridge. Now you're looking down. Agawam's on the right. I grew up on the left there. That's Long Meadow. The Fanny Stebbins Wildlife Sanctuary is there along the river. And it's a beautiful patch of open space in the floodplain of the Connecticut. You've got these big cottonwood trees, all sorts of wildlife, migratory birds. I call this slide Big Guy, Little Fish. That was the biggest fish we caught that day. And the next dam is what's left of the Infield Dam. There's no plans to replace it. They're just going to leave it crumble down. It could be a hazard to try and kayak over. Some people are trying to take their boats over but lost their props. And nearby is the old Windsor Locks Canal. Here, the canal is elevated above a stream that flows into the Connecticut River. So because of the Infield Rapids, barges couldn't get over it because of all the rocks and the rapids. So they'd pull them up the canal this way by horse or by ox. We've made it down into Connecticut further. Rocky Hill, there is a ferry that still will take your car from one side of the river to the other, and here's where it docks. And the operator. And then further down, you've got the swing bridge. This is at Deep River, Connecticut. So when I say swing bridge, most of the bridges we see over waterways or drawbridges, they elevate. This one pivots on its main support here, so traffic can come by either side of it. So it's really kind of an ingenious method. So any kind of sailboat, no matter how tall the mast, could get by. But I was talking to the bridge tender, and he said every now and then it gets stuck in that open position, and there's no way for him to get off except swim for it. And the Goodspeed Opera House. Years ago, sadly, they were going to tear this down, but people from the surrounding towns got in on fundraising, and they raised the money to restore it, and it's back in operation now, right on the banks of the river. So it's a beautiful structure, one of the ones I'm glad they saved. The actor who used to play Sherlock Holmes at the Goodspeed Opera House, he built this castle. His last name was Gillette, and this was his home. And he had a little train line that was bringing his guests right up the hill to his castle. And today it's owned by the state of Connecticut, so you can drive up and get this beautiful view from the deck of Gillette Castle. I was there in the morning, so you're looking towards the southeast here. I always love this picture because you've got the storm clouds coming in from the northwest, and you've got the Goodspeed Opera House there. Gillette Castle is just to the right off the picture. You've got a tour boat that takes you all the way out to the ocean, the swing bridge. It's all right here, Deep River, Essex area, Haddam. You're wondering why I would go on a boat in the middle of the winter. Well, they lead tours to look for bald eagles because they want to be where the water's open if they can, to still be able to get fish. If the water's not open, then they're going to feed on deer that are chased out on the ice by coyotes. But we did see some, and they were big, massive, mature bald eagles up in the tops of trees gathered in this spot. I always thought, first time, couple times I went by this hot dog stand in the middle of the river, I thought, what a tough way to make a living, be trapped out there on that little boat at anchor trying to sell a hot dog. But then I came by on a weekend and it was jammed with boats trying to buy hot dogs all in a long line. So he had a little business going. Then I wondered if the hot dog man owns this mansion that was so incredible right on the banks of the Connecticut. And again, years ago, you couldn't sell land along the river because nobody wanted to live there because of the health hazard. And now the land is incredibly pricey because people with yachts could keep them right in their backyard here and go down the river and get into the open sea. And the sea is a theme, water is a theme in almost all 30 of my books. I'm best known for the true survival at sea stories. And my personal favorite is A Storm Too Soon. But all of my books, there's some kind of connection to water because I just gravitate towards it. This is the Connecticut River History Museum in Essex, and it's worth a stop. And inside, there's a painting of the first submarine that humans made, and it's called the American Turtle. And then they've got a likeness of it out back. But the way this thing would operate is he'd turn the crank and the propeller would move, and it was built during the Revolution to hopefully sneak under a British warship and then using that drill on the top, drill a hole and sink the ship. They never did claim to sink any ships, but it did stay underwater for 15 minutes. So they're, crowning themselves as the first submarine. I mentioned the striped bass. That's a great environmental success story. With the proper regulations and limits that people can keep, the stock has come back. Now the big issue is all the seals expanding along the Massachusetts and Rhode Island coastline. They're eating the striped bass, and then the great white sharks are coming in for the seals. So a lot of places where I used to swim and kayak, I avoid now because if there's a lot of seals, there's a great white lurking around. We've made it to the end. We've got Old Saybrook and Lyme, Connecticut, beautiful towns. No city here. Like most rivers have a city at their mouth, but this was too shallow, so the development went to the river just to the north of here, the Thames River in Groton. So they've preserved a lot of this space around the mouth, and the Nature Conservancy calls this one of the 10 great places in America that's been preserved in its natural state, surprisingly. So if you're interested in any of the books for the holidays, you can order them on my website. I try to be competitive with Amazon, but there's a way when you do the order to have it personalized. Say you're giving it as a gift for Christmas, you could tell me who to make it out to. And the website is just myname.com. But also on the website, there's some video of both some of the survivor stories, the rescues that the Coast Guard filmed, and interviews I did with the survivors of how in the world they got through these ordeals that I write about. And then when you see the lighthouse, this is when I knew I did all 400. I shouldn't say all 410 miles, because again, I skipped that real shallow section way up in northern Pittsburgh. And I'm going to close with a quote by Thoreau. This was not in Walden, this was in one of his journals. And it kind of struck me as appropriate for the Connecticut River. He said, "We are slow to realize water, the beauty and the magic of it." In other words, because we have so much water in New England, we tend to take it for granted and, don't realize what we have. But or you spend time out west where they've got all these water issues, you realize just how lucky we are. And I'm going to stop the screen sharing so I can get you folks back if that's possible. And I'd be happy to take questions. 1 second while I try to exit this. Okay, I can see everybody. Hi, Jane.
Hi. Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Didn't it make you feel a little warmer, all those summer scenes?
Yeah.
Questions or comments? I've been tempted to do the whole river all at once, but every time I think it through, I go, I don't know. That sounds pretty grueling.
Just as an aside, I grew up in Connecticut. We used to go fishing at Infield Dam when the shad were running. And you're right, the rapids there are really treacherous. My father tried a couple times to get a boat up, but he gave up on that idea.
You know, you grew up right next to me. I grew up in Long Meadow and worked on the infield line at Armada's supermarket there. So I used to fish there too for the shad. There's still good fishing there from what I understand. And you get the striped bass that come all the way to eat the shad.
Jane, you have a question? You're muted, Jane.
There we go.
Yeah.
I missed where the Dinosaur Track was, and I'm very curious. I'd like to go see it.
Yes. There's two places. One is called Dinosaur Park, I think it's called, and it's a trustees of the reservation property. So it's just like a little pull-off on the side of the road down. I think it's in Holyoke, but on the west side of the river, off Route 5. If you Google that, you know, trustees of the reservation, dinosaur. But the bigger park where kids would really enjoy it, because there's, you know, hundreds of footprints rather than just 5 or 6, is in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, I think is the town. And there they've got an enclosed museum as well. So for some reason, that's where they found the most dinosaur tracks. I bet they were everywhere along the river, but just development obliterated them, or, you know, they're still under the earth and never been uncovered.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, kids love that stuff. They're into dinosaurs and sharks.
Yes. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Speaking of sharks, I have a book coming out. Remember the thinking of the Indianapolis in World War II? That was that major fiasco where we lost a big Navy ship, and the rescue effort was terrible. So most of the people were killed by sharks. But I'm writing the young adult version of that story, and it'll be out in February. So I'm putting that to slides because it's such a twisted story with so many turns and surprises and screw-ups by the Navy, and then they blamed it all on the captain when it wasn't really entirely his fault. So I like those kind of stories where it's kind of murky and you really have to investigate.
I also grew up in Long Meadow, which I found it interesting that you did. I didn't know that.
Oh, wow.
Before this, but I was curious in the meadows, the preserve off of Dark Road there, where the pond skating was, all on the other side of the road from the river. Were those areas man-made? Because there was like footpaths between them, and they were very uniform in shape.
I think there were, you know, there's a lot of natural water there too, with the Long Meadow Brook that comes through there. But yeah, I think those were man-made because of, like you say, the very straight and the footpaths. My latest book is called, you might like this because you grew up in Long Meadow, it's called The Waters Between Us. And it opens up with a scene right where that area you described, because when I was a kid, my father was a baker and he dropped me and my brother off there for a day of fishing. And he'd drop us off at like 5 a.m. in the morning. Half the time it'd still be dark. We didn't even know where we were. So that book is brand new. It's called The Waters Between Us. And then the action moves to Vermont because I went to St. Michael's College. And for years also we vacationed on Lake Maury. So I fell in love with Vermont, and that's when I got the idea to save every penny for the cabin for the porcupine in the outhouse story. I still have the cabin, and people go, "Hey, did you fix it up and put in plumbing?" And I go, "No, I like it simple. I just shut the door at the end of the season."
Thank you all. Definitely take a look at the book. I'm also a St. Mike's grad.
Oh, wow.
Coincidence, yeah.
Small world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Where do you live now, Michael?
So I split my time. I spend some time in Florida in the winter, but my main base is in Mendon, Massachusetts when I'm not at the cabin.
Okay.
Mendon is out, near Milford, Framingham, that area.
Bradford Elliott, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, please, Michael. Great presentation. I grew up on the river too, down in Glastonbury.
Yeah.
Just upstream from that ferry, and many just great memories of playing on the riverbank and going out in rudimentary rafts on ice floes. Trying to be Huck Finn. The question I had though, what was it like handling the portages, or did you just cleverly avoid those things?
I did the first one by lugging my that Old Town pack canoe and almost killed myself. And then I cleverly avoided those where I said, okay, I'll end at the portage. And then when I resume the next weekend, I'll start there.
Right.
Downriver.
Good deal.
But I did switch to the kayak more and more as I went down the river, found it more comfortable, faster, because I was, taking so much time pulling up, interviewing people for the book. So I tend to use my kayaks way more than my canoes.
Good deal. Yeah, that makes sense. Especially in camping would be hard, out of a kayak, I think. Can be done though.
Yeah, they've got those ones where, you have that in the front of the hull where the piece comes off, you could put your gear in and keep it safe from the water. And I've rigged rod holders on my kayak so I can troll for the striped bass.
Good deal.
That's like a Nantucket sleigh ride if you get one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone. Stay safe this winter. Jane, thank you so much for all your hard work putting it together again.
Thank you, Michael. It was a really good show.
Thank you all.
Fantastic.
Stay warm.
Yeah, you too.
Will do. Bye-bye.
Bye.